We're back on the Sports Zone. I am Mike Aglialoro. We're continuing our series looking at the NFL through the first month of the off season, heading into the draft, going division by division, looking at the team's areas of improvement and the areas they are still in need of, like I said, as we head into the NFL draft. And if you hadn't had a chance to do so, make sure you take a look at Jake Dixon's series, going position by position, giving his top 5 prospects at each position for the NFL draft. He's done the cornerbacks, defensive tackles. His latest one is the defensive ends, and he will be looking at the safeties over the weekend. And if you get a chance, check out Tom Lembo's preview of the big Pacquiao versus Bradley rematch scheduled for Saturday night in Las Vegas on HBO pay-per-view. So we're going to continue our series, and we're going to look at the AFC East. Now, in my opinion, this division is always the Patriots until someone proves otherwise. And the Patriots went 12-4 last year with arguably Tom Brady's weakest receiving core in at least 5 seasons. And the Bills, the Jets, and the Dolphins are still nowhere close to being able to capture them. They have made some strides so far this offseason, but they still have a lot of areas of need. And we'll start with the Buffalo Bills. Bills, of course, added an offensive lineman, one of the better ones out there, in Chris Williams from the St. Louis Rams. But the big loss for them was losing arguably the biggest name free agent available in this year's crop, the safety Jarius Byrd, who, of course, signed with the New Orleans Saints very early in the offseason. They were able to sign Corey Graham, the cornerback out of Baltimore, to try to replace him. But that is still a large area of weakness as we enter Doug Marrone's second season as the Bills head coach. Now, Doug Marrone did wind up adding one of his former players in wide receiver Mike Williams, formerly of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Williams had a really good rookie season, but the last 2 seasons have been plagued with mediocrity and a lot of injuries. Marrone is confident he'll be able to turn that around. And when you add Mike Williams to Stevie Johnson and Robert Woods, these are 2 guys who are not number 1 wide receivers, but they both fit the mold of number 2 and number 3 wide receivers. And adding a guy like Mike Williams to that is going to at least be able to take some pressure off of them, make it so defenses can't do the double team, and it should help out all 3 of them. And while their defense did lose linebacker Arthur Moats to the Pittsburgh Steelers and defensive tackle Alex Carrington to the St. Louis Rams, they were able to add linebackers Brandon Spikes from the New England Patriots and Keith Rivers from the New York Giants. So they did add to the linebacking core, which already has standout Kiki Alonso coming off a great rookie season, entering his second season. So adding those 2 to him is going to be a big help. Areas of need for them, I think they need at least 1 more offensive lineman or 2. They could use another wide receiver, at least for the depth factor. If you're not going to have a legitimate number 1, you need to have some strong number 2s and number 3s there. You got 3 good ones, you could use a 4th. On the defensive side, I would look for them to add another defensive lineman or 2 at least to replace Carrington. And because they did lose Jarius Byrd, they're going to need a lot of help in that secondary. Cornerback, safety, doesn't matter where. We'll move to the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins, of course, are coming off an 8-8 season, which was plagued by the Jonathan Martin, Richie Incognito scandal. They're looking to replace as many as 4 offensive linemen coming into this offseason, and they made the big splash right off the bat, signing left tackle Brandon Albert from the Kansas City Chiefs. And they did sign 2 other linemen in Shelley Smith, formerly of the St. Louis Rams, and Jason Fox, formerly of the Detroit Lions. But they still need a dramatic youth infusion on that offensive line to protect Ryan Tannehill entering his 3rd season in the league. They did sign Noshawn Moreno at running back, which is going to be good. He's going to be much better in pass protection and in the short passing game for Tannehill than Danny Thomas and Lamar Miller have been over the last couple of years, so that's a help. They are going to need another wide receiver or 2 to go with Mike Wallace and Brian Hartline. Those are 2 good wide receivers, but they need someone to take the pressure off. You saw what Wallace was and wasn't able to do in his first season in Miami. They're going to need some help. And on the defensive side of the football, they did add to that secondary. They did re-sign Brett Grimes at cornerback. They signed Louis Delmas, formerly of the Lions, at safety. And they did add Cortland Finnegan, formerly of the St. Louis Rams, to that secondary as well. But they also lost Nolan Carroll to the Eagles, Dimitri Patterson to the Jets, and Chris Clemens at safety to the Houston Texans. So they are going to be looking to add a piece or two to that secondary just for some depth purposes. And after losing Paul Salai at defensive tackle to the Atlanta Falcons, they may be looking for a piece or two along the defensive line as well. We'll move to the Jets next. And the Jets, of course, missed out on every major cornerback available in this year's free agency, including cutting their own cornerback, Antonio Cromartie. Then they missed out on Aqib Talib, Darrelle Revis, Alteron Werner, and Cromartie's cousin, Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie. They were able to sign Dimitri Patterson off the Dolphins, but they're going to be looking to completely rebuild that secondary, even though they do feel confident that Dean Milner is going to be able to take a step forward. I still look for them to add at least one or two members to that secondary, which, in my opinion, could use a little bit more. They lost Austin Howard and Vladimir Dukas during free agency off the offensive line, so if I'm them, I'm looking to add at least one or two more pieces, because you did add Eric Decker and Jacoby Ford to a receiving core that sorely needed a boost, and you now have Michael Vick to go with Geno Smith. One of those two is going to be starting, probably both of them at various points throughout the season next year. You need an offensive line to protect them, and you could use one more wide receiver to go with them at the very least. Decker and Ford are good. Decker is not a legitimate number one wide receiver, and we're not really sure how Ford is going to fit into the system just yet. They could use another wide receiver. They are being rumored to be in the Chris Johnson sweepstakes at running back, but if they don't get him, they may look to add another running back, even though I like what they have in Chris Ivory and Bilal Powell, truthfully. Maybe if you want to add another change of pace guy, you go do that. But to switch gears, I wouldn't mind seeing them add another linebacker or two. They have this incredible defensive front, guys like Damon Harrison and Muhammad Wilkerson, and they do have the young linebacker Quentin Coples, and they re-signed Calvin Pace. I wouldn't mind seeing them add another piece or two around that just for some depth purposes. You never know what could happen with injuries. And if you're going in with that secondary, which has a lot of question marks right now, I would reinforce that front seven just to be on the safe side. Now we'll move to the Patriots, and the Patriots, like I said earlier, Brady had one of his best seasons while having arguably one of the weakest wide receiving cores of his career. Still don't know what Rob Gronkowski is going to be able to do this season if he's going to be fully healthy. They did re-sign Julian Edelman, who was basically their number one wide receiver this past season. And they did add Brandon LaFell, wide receiver from the Carolina Panthers, to go with Kenbrell Tompkins, Aaron Dobson, and Danny Amendola. All three were injured at various points throughout the season, especially Amendola, so they're looking for some bounce back out of all three of them, even though Dobson and Tompkins had respectable rookie campaigns. On the secondary, they lost Aqib Talib, and within mere hours, they replaced him with Darrelle Revis. They added Brandon Brower from the Seattle Seahawks, who will be suspended for the first couple of games. But with him and Patrick Chung and Revis, you got to figure that secondary is going to look a lot better than it did at stages during last season. So that's going to help them. If I'm them, I'm looking to add something to that front seven. They've gotten pretty lucky with some of the draft picks they made in recent years, like Chandler Jones a couple of years ago. They did add Dante Hightower last season, and they are hoping Jared Mayo can come back off of his injury, but they lost Brandon Spikes this offseason. He, of course, had some pointed comments for his former franchise a couple days ago, and they did lose one of their top linebackers, Dane Fletcher, in free agency as well. So if I'm the Patriots, I wouldn't mind another offensive lineman or two, especially on that right side to protect Tom Brady. Maybe another wide receiver, but I expect them to at least be looking to the front seven, defensive line, linebacker, somewhere in the secondary, maybe a safety or two as well. So to recap, right now, and as much as this division, I still feel is not entirely finished yet. Bills have done the least. They're still in fourth place. Dolphins are right behind them in third place. I'm going to give a slight edge to the Jets here, even though they could use another wide receiver or two. They need to fortify that secondary, add pieces to the offensive line. One way or another, this is still the Patriots' division to lose. Once again, guys, check out some of the other content on This is SportsZone, the 2014 NFL Draft Preview, top 5 prospects at each position by Jake Dixon. We got the cornerbacks, defensive tackles, and defensive ends. Dave Tice takes a look at James Shields being released from the UFC and what this means for his career. You got Tom Lembo previewing the big Manny Pacquiao-Tim Bradley rematch at Las Vegas this Saturday on pay-per-view. And we're going to have some other content up as well from guys like Jay Rofsky, George Murphy, and the whole SportsZone crew. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at WeAreSportsZone. Send us any questions and comments you may have. Once again, thanks for watching, folks. For This is SportsZone, I am Mike Aglialoro. We will see you next time, folks.